Well, thank you very much. I am delighted to see so many friends and people I respect here, both in Taiwan, of course, but also have come so far to join us in observing this election. Julian Han made a comment earlier when he was chairing that he thought that he doesn't see often so much talent in one room. It reminded me of the very gracious note that John F. Kennedy struck early in his presidency when he invited all of America's Nobel Prize winners to the White House for a lunch and said, no, not so much talent had been gathered under one roof at the White House since Thomas Jefferson had slept there and died alone. And today I would say it's something like, not so much talent has been gathered here in Taiwan since Li Guoding died alone. Alan said everything I wanted to say, so I'll just pass the microphone over to the next speaker. No, actually, this I think, I'm going to put things much the same. I think Alan and I agree on a lot of the steps that we hope will be taken in the days and weeks ahead. I'd like to emphasize the positive new atmosphere I think has been established. This is, in my view, the first day of a potentially great new era in East Asia. We have been, throughout the region, people have been recoiling from the demands of Taiwan to choose between the rising great power of China and the sentiments and important interests of the people of Taiwan. And people felt trapped in a zero-sum game. We now have the potential to transform this into a positive-sum game. And President-elect Ma, whom I had the privilege to know a long time, has himself the personal characteristics to understand this. As the panel previously, and as Ellen just mentioned, there are lots of hurdles and difficulties within Taiwan to make it difficult to realize the full potential of the new era, I think, has dawned. Trust, credibility, stability, and continuity have been missing for too long in the relationship between the United States and Taiwan. I believe that people surrounding President-elect Ma understand this. They've said that as much during the campaign. We've been lucky, in fact, that much of the mandate that's been bestowed on the new president has been articulated in the form of policy during the course of the campaign. He's told us what he's going to do, and among them is to reestablish trust with the United States, which I think is a correct first step. In cross-Strait relations, to touch on what Alan just spoke about, I think the first step toward improving cross-Strait relations was taken yesterday. The second step is up to China to recognize the opportunity that's been presented. It is a historic and a strategic opportunity for China to put down the potential for a hotspot, a flare-up, a crisis in the Taiwan Strait, and address other issues to build a long-term peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, something that's been the subject of rhetoric but little action for too many years. The improvement of relations with Beijing will be difficult for many reasons. Alan's mentioned some. I would point out that Beijing easily becomes, to choose another word, constipated when they have issues such as Tibet and management of the public relations around the Olympic Games and other things coming in on them and intruding on their own domestic deliberations. But I hope that Beijing will also see that a chance to improve the environment across the strait at a time when they're beleaguered by these other issues is too good to miss. And they will do the things precisely as Alan mentioned. I think an important symbol on the eve of the upcoming inaugural address would be to see a Taiwan observer sitting at the World Health Assembly. Some Chinese have told me the real reason there has been no Taiwanese observer at the World Health Assembly is Mr. Chen Shui-bian. That any concession made, even of the smallest nature, they expect to be turned into a domestic political football here in Taiwan. And if that game is over, if it's not a zero-sum game, it's a positive-sum game, much becomes possible. Turning from, Alan said a lot about Beijing, so I won't go on. Turning to the United States, again, there's tremendous scope for improving the interpersonal and other relations between the United States and Taiwan. We have an established pattern of transits where Taiwan leaders pass through the United States. These can be warmer or cooler, and likely they've been cooler for good reason. But there's a lot that can be done on these. Some talk earlier, in the earlier panel was about whether or not Mr. Ma should be able to visit Washington or not. I think that becomes irrelevant if there's a trust and confidence between the two sides. And the quality of the relationship can be improved and elevated. But it has to be done as a positive sum game with a view to what is being asked of Beijing at the same time. If for Beijing it's a loss of status if Taiwan's contacts with the United States are elevated, it's not going to happen. If Beijing sees that it's a reinforcing mechanism to keep the process moving toward stabilization and economic development, I think they'll take a different attitude. To get down into the weeds a little bit, as someone who spends a lot of time in Southeast Asia, I've been really sorry to see, since the early 1990s, the diminishment of Taiwan's influence in Southeast Asia. Taiwan business people and some of their diplomats have been very creatively working in Southeast Asia. They enjoy a lot of respect. But the constant demand of impolite questions, for example, Singapore's hosting of the Taiwan naval vessels as they pass through Singapore. When this was not called a independence fleet, they could go dockside and have people come and visit the ships and have nice parties. And when they said it was an independence fleet, they spent their time out at sea, didn't get into the port. That's just a small example of the kinds of potential. The old days of what was under Li Donghui with his passion for golf, was golf diplomacy and holiday diplomacy. They can be resuscitated in a new form, perhaps, if the people in those, if the governments in the region are not asked impossible questions. I think that can be, and this is also true for Japan and South Korea, especially with the new South Korean government. There's big potential there, and I think Japan's very sympathetic to Taiwan and is looking for that kind of new status in the multilateral dialogue that involves Taiwan. I think there's a potential for a ceasefire in the competition for the small states' recognition in the Pacific, Latin America, and Africa. I've talked to Chinese officials about it. They seem to understand what I'm saying, and others are saying to them. Both parties are wasting resources and creating instabilities, fomenting actual political problems in states that are already stressed by their size and lack of resources. And I hope that Taiwan and China can agree on this tacitly and perhaps even eventually bilaterally. And then finally address an issue that I got to understand acutely, and that is that Taiwan with its 23 million people has some great talent. If you're talented, you don't often want to go in the government. And there's more money to be made outside than less headaches. But I think that we've got to, I hope President-elect Ma and his inner team will look to draw from the broad range of really talented people in business and academic and other circles as they put together a new government for the next 4 years. That's my final observation. Thank you very much for your attention.